Chancellor. We really appreciate it. We're really looking forward to your questions, your comments, your ideas, anything you want to put before us. I'm not going to make a great speech about the election. You know it's coming. It's 5 weeks on Thursday. It's a big moment for our country, a really big moment, because all of the power goes from us politicians to you. You're the ones that will decide the future for your community. You're the ones that are going to decide the future for your country. So your choice really, really matters that day. And the choice is pretty straightforward. We've had 14 years now of this government, and there's been a lot of chaos, a lot of division, and lots of things don't work as well now as they did 14 years ago. In my book of politics, if you leave your country worse than where you found it, then you shouldn't be given another 5 years, and the country should have the chance to say, sorry, let's stop that chaos, let's turn the page, and let's rebuild our country with a Labour government. So that's the basic choice that is out there. One of the central things that we're saying, and Rachel made a big speech about it this morning, is that the economy has to be the first priority. Growing the economy and making sure that living standards everywhere go up. That's secure, skilled jobs, the sort of jobs that you've got here, and obviously all of the feeder jobs that come in to the brilliant work that you are doing here. And we want to hear about a bit of that work as well, because we're very committed to what you're doing, and we see the way forward as a real partnership between government and business. So we need your views on that as we go forward. But it is your chance to exercise your choice. The other difference there will be if there's an incoming Labour government is that we will return politics to service, because I think politicians should serve the country. I think we've had far too much self-entitlement in the last few years. So it'll be a government of service, and that means that what you think should happen matters, which is why we're going to now throw it open for a Q&A. I think we've got some questions. Anybody who's got a question or a comment, we're not going to filter this. We're not going to pick out only given individuals. So anyone who wants to say something, we want to hear from you. We'll stay for as long as possible to do that. Any question on any topic, or if you just want to say, I haven't got a question, but what matters to me is this, or why don't you consider that, is perfectly all right with us, because if we're here to serve you, then it's not a kind invitation to hear your views. It's your right to give us your views. And I want you to exercise that right. So shall we kick off? Have we got a question? Yes, please.
Hi, Andrew Fleet, Airbus Public Safety and Security. I've been with Airbus for 2 years now. I have to say I've never actually voted Labour, not yet.
That's all right, that's allowed.
Not yet. But I have for a long time been a big fan of Meg Hillier, the chair of the Public Accounts Committee. And I saw recently she was dubbed the Waste Finder General by the New Statesman. Prior to joining the Airbus family, I spent 5 years inside the Home Office, which was an interesting experience, on the Emergency Services Network programme, which I think has been failing to deliver for almost as long as this government. But so my question, given hopefully there's little scope for tax rises, fingers crossed, would you make it a priority in government to take a good hard look at many of the government procurement programmes which are not, have been failing to give value for public money, given the amount of waste there is?
Yeah, I'll start on that, and then Rachel and I do a bit of a double act, so we'll come in. The first thing is, on your point about tax rises, there have been far too many tax rises over recent years. The current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has raised taxes more than any other politician, either as Chancellor or as Prime Minister. And we've always said consistently that putting more burden on working people is not the way forward, particularly in a cost of living crisis. Because in addition to those tax rises, which you've all had to bear, the energy bills have gone up, the food bills have gone up, you name it, everything else has gone up. So that isn't the way forward. What we do need to do is grow the economy. And we've been flatlining on the economy now for the best part of 14 years. And that's not good enough. because it impacts on people's lives. Now, on your specific question on procurement, I think we can do a lot better on procurement. And I'd just give you 2 or 3 examples of that. There is too much waste, it's too slow, and we don't always get value for money. That is something which Rachel will bear down on. Try getting money out of Rachel in a hurry, and you'll just see how... No, but because Rachel understands that taxpayers' money is taxpayers' money, and therefore you should look after it as carefully as you'd look after your own money. With your own finances, you don't waste money on things that aren't value for money. Nobody does that, and it shouldn't be any different, which is the approach that Rachel takes. I do think there's a sort of... On procurement in particular, I do think there's a positive side as well, because if you take defence, which is obviously, you know, the first priority of any government, then there's defence procurement, which at the moment isn't considered to be part of our economic growth, and it should be. And I think that we could take a quicker, better, more strategic approach when it comes to procurement in defence. But Rachel, over to you, because the value for money is obviously one of your bugbears, quite rightly.
Thank you very much for your question, Andrew. And you're right what you say about taxes. Taxes are now at a 70-year high. And at the same time, public services are on their knees. People are paying more and more and yet getting less and less in return. So we do need to crack down on the waste. We've made the commitment not to increase income tax or national insurance at all in the next Parliament. We would like it to be lower, but I'm not going to make any commitment around tax or spending without being able to say exactly where the money comes from. That's really important, that we have those tough fiscal rules, that we won't make any commitments that aren't fully costed and fully funded. But that means, as you say, Andrew, we've got to get a grip of public spending and crack down on waste. One of the things that has angered me most in this Parliament is the billions and billions of pounds handed out during the pandemic to companies that didn't deliver on the contracts. And I don't know about what happens at Airbus, but I bet that when you sign a contract, if you don't get what you put in that contract, you do everything in your power to get your money back. And that is what government should be doing on contracts that didn't deliver during the pandemic. And I've said that we would set up a COVID corruption commissioner to get every penny back that we can from those contracts that didn't deliver, because that money belongs in our public services, not in the pockets of people that didn't deliver on contracts that they promised. And more widely on procurement, we've got to get value for money. As I say, people are paying more and more in tax, getting less and less in return. So we need to look from the bottom up of everything that government spends its money on and make sure, as Keir says, we treat public money with respect once again and get value for money for it.
Let's have another question, and I'll look around the place. Yes, young lady there with the... Yep, please. And if we're not going to a part of the room and you feel you're being ignored, please shout out or get our attention.
Hi, my name's Emma. I've been working here for about 5 years now. What are your thoughts on Rishi Sunak's proposed plan to strip GPs of their power to sign people off work? A plan that's been labelled unbelievably damaging and unhelpful by leading disability charities.
Well, look, I think Rishi Sunak is putting out a lot of ideas now which are pretty desperate stuff. Almost every day he rummages around in the sort of toy box of possible ideas and flings one on the table. And yesterday we had national service for teenagers, or teenage dad's army, which is apparently his suggestion of the way forward. Today we've had something on pensions but no funding for it, which goes back to Rachel's point about making sure that everything you say is fully costed and fully funded. On the question of sort of bypassing GPs, I think he's going down the wrong track. Now, there are many people, I would acknowledge, who are not in work at the moment, who want to be back in work, in fairness to them, but they don't feel supported back into work. And I think they should be supported back into work. Sometimes because of physical health or mental health, they've got, they're not absolutely confident that they can go back into the workplace. Very many good employers, and I've seen this in practice, are running schemes to help people come back to work so that they can actually contribute, which is what they want to do, and help build our economy. So I think that there are positive, sensible, grown-up things that we can do to help. But what we've got to get away from, and you're going to see a lot of it in this election, I think, is desperate ideas from the Tories. I mean, after 14 years, they're rummaging around for anything to fling on the table to try and get a bit of attention. National service for teenagers is just so badly thought through. the first question is bound to be, well, how are you going to enforce it? What happens if someone says no, to which they couldn't give an answer? I mean, if you haven't even thought to question one, you haven't thought it through, and we're going to see a lot of that. Thank you very much. Where else should we go? Yeah, I can just about see you.
That's all right. My name's Will.
Will.
Hey, yeah, Will. I'm a graduate engineer here at Airbus. I work on spacecraft, so I'm currently working on lunar mission planning.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
It is fantastic, by the way, thank you for letting us come to your workplace, because this, for me and for Rachel, is really uplifting to be able to come and see what you're doing, some of the most incredible engineering and design and build in the world. And to be able to come and see it is brilliant. And you can't do it through a briefing. So over to you.
It's truly exciting.
That's great.
But based on my experience as an engineer, I've noticed that my peers in countries like the US and Germany often enjoy higher salaries and better career prospects. Given the global economic differences and existing efforts, what specific steps would a Labour government take to increase investment in UK aerospace, improve professional recognition for engineers, and ensure our pay and opportunities are competitive on a global scale? Thank you.
Well, I will say a few words and I'll pass to Rachel, because she made a speech this morning all about investment. My strong view is that there is investment to be made here in space projects, in defence projects, in the work that you're doing. I strongly believe that, and we've had lots of discussions with those that want to invest in the United Kingdom. When we ask them, well, why aren't you investing at the moment, the answer they most often give is because it's too chaotic. There's too much chopping and changing. And the idea of having sort of 5 prime ministers in the last government, 6 chancellors, 7 chancellors. I mean, it's politically funny, and you might think, well, Keir, you're leader of the opposition. Surely it's great for you if the government's all over the place with, 4 budgets in 1 year. 4 chancellors, I think, in the course of 1 year. You might think, well, as leader of the opposition, that's great because the government is chaotic. But it's really bad for the country. It's really bad for investment, because guess what? People who are serious about investment are not going to put it into an environment where they don't think things are calm and stable. And that's why the number one thing on investment is providing the environment, the stable economy that we need, with a clear vision for the future and a plan that we stick to. Yeah. So if you say you're going to support this sector, then you've got to be doing that not just for 6 months or 12 months and then change your mind or try and change the timelines. You've got to stick with it for the long term. And so I think government plays a really important role in this. Final thing I'll say, and then we'll go to Rachel, is it's also about partnership. People know if there's a partnership between Airbus and the government. They know whether that's working. Is the government pulling its weight? Does it understand what you're trying to do here? And are we fully behind it? Out there in the world, people watch that, they see it. And in other countries, they observe that partnership. And we want to build that partnership here. But Rachel gave a speech this morning about investment, so I'll just pass over to her on some more of the detail.
Well, thanks very much for that question, Will. The number one commitment that I gave in the speech earlier today was to bring stability back to the economy, because stability is what families need to plan for the future, but also, crucially, it is what businesses need to make long-term investment. And we now have the lowest investment as a share of GDP than any country in the G7. And one of the reasons why wages have not kept up with comparable countries is that we're not investing enough in Britain. And the state of the public finances mean that it's not going to be a load of public investment. Frankly, if I become Chancellor in a few weeks' time, I'm not going to have that luxury. So it's going to be about what government can do to leverage in private sector investment. Stability has got to come first, but we've also committed to a modern industrial strategy that we write in partnership with business. And sectors like defence and space, as well as pharmaceuticals and zero carbon technologies, they are some of the areas where there is huge potential in the UK because of our industrial heritage, because of our geography, because of our great universities and the skills that we already have. And so we would want to focus with a laser focus on the sectors where we already have a comparative advantage, but where there is a lot of competition and where we think there is growth potential. And this is definitely one of those sectors. So stability, a plan for investment, a modern industrial strategy, then also reform of the apprenticeship levy so that it works better for business and also works better for young people and people who want to retrain and get the skills that they need to succeed in the world of work. But in the end, it's got to be more of a partnership approach. In the last few years, it felt like government and business have been pulling in different directions. And I said in my speech today that if I'm Chancellor in a few weeks' time, it will be the most pro-growth Treasury this country has ever seen. Because unless we can grow the economy, we're not going to be able to boost wages, we're not going to be able to improve living standards, and we would have failed. So being pro-growth, being pro-business is about ensuring that we can lift wages, end the cost of living crisis, and give our country its future back.
And well, finally on this, we need the government needs to be a champion of what we do in this country. What you do here is fantastic. We need to be out there as ambassadors for that across the world, winning the trade into this country and rolling up our sleeves and doing it. We have a lot to be really proud of. We're really good at stuff in this country, but you need a government that's out there absolutely advocating for it. Where should we go next? Is there a part of the room yet that we haven't been to?
My name's... Hi, I'm Hazel Wood. I'm a project manager and I've been here for 27 years.
27 years, wow. Hazel, that's great.
So one thing, following on from the question, one thing I'm very passionate outside of engineering and space is education and inspiring our next generation. So one of the things I do in my spare time, I'm a school governor, so I'm interested on what your thoughts are.
Primary school or secondary school?
Both. I'm on an academy trust, so I'm interested what your next steps of Labour for academies, free schools and for multi-academy trusts.
Okay, well, look, thank you for raising that. As the father of a boy who's just doing his GCSEs, I've got a lot of focus on education at the moment. We need to do some basics when it comes to education, and then we need to do some changes. The basics are making sure we've got the right teachers, particularly in our secondary schools. One of the things I'm most frustrated, to put it politely, about is that we've got a Prime Minister who keeps going on about maths till 18, but we haven't got enough maths teachers for our children up to age 16 in our secondary schools. That is just not good enough. Because if you're missing a key teacher at the age that my son is now 15 or 16 or at that secondary school, if you're missing it, that's not just something that went wrong for a year or two. For that child, that's their whole education affected for the rest of their life. Because we all know, I'm drilling it into my boy, if your GCSEs matter for what you want to do next. And so it's a stepping stone. So we've got to fill that gap. We need 6,500 more state secondary school teachers. And so we're going to invest in that by getting rid of the tax break for private schools and putting it into that space. That's just the sort of patching up, make sure we've got the basics in place. More broadly, I think that we should be looking again at education and making sure that the skills we're teaching in our schools are the skills that people are going to need for the jobs they're actually going to go into and the lives they're actually going to lead. And also that we teach our young people confidence. And one of the things I'm very, very keen on is what I call confident speaking, which is teaching young people to be able to hold their arguments, to be able to be confident in what they say. Think about all the interviews you've done to get various jobs or to do whatever, or the way you work in teams here. You need to be confident in your ideas. You need to be able to communicate with other people. These are skills that matter in the job, so we need to do that as well. The other thing is that we need to make sure that our sort of technical colleges, where we've got skills, operate better, because at the moment, many companies, I'd be really interested in your views on this, say with the skills we need, we can't actually get anywhere near here just at the moment. And that's a strategic failure that we need to address. So I think there's a lot to do in that space. Would you have, I mean, if you just come in, what do you want me to think about on the train when I'm going home in terms of what else we should do on schools? I mean, you're a governor of a primary and a secondary.
I definitely think that teacher retention is very important, and I agree. I've got a daughter doing her A-levels, and similar lacking teachers is a big problem. And I think it's about having that joined up view of what you're saying, thinking about the country, where do we want to go to, having engineers, having the skills here, and how we feed that into our schools.
And we need to celebrate technical skills as well, the sort of skills that many of you have here. My dad was an engineer. He worked in a factory, he was a tool maker, and he always felt that technical skills were undervalued. And I've sort of carried that all my life because I think he's right. If you look at the technical skills, they are incredibly clever, incredibly demanding and challenging. And I want young people to value that and to want to do it. And I hope that all of you, or as many of you as possible, are getting into your local schools, because I think if local, and I'm sure they do, local children came in here to see what you do, many of them would say, I want a job like that. Yeah. And that's a very good thing. Great, let's go somewhere else, shall we? I've got one, I know there's one at the front. I'll just go to the back so we're getting a bit of everything in. Yeah, I can just about see you. Yep, got you. Have we've got a roving mic somewhere, I think? Could someone... thank you. Thank you, Prentice. Very, very well done.
Hello, Bob Hopton, system engineer at Airbus for the last 12, 13
Your name
years.
again, sorry?
Bob Hopton.
Bob, yeah, that's better. Thank you.
My question is about freedom of movement for both goods and people. We are an industry which relies on transnational working, whether it's sending people to meetings, whether it's sending engineers to work on spacecraft in test facilities around Europe. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this was easy. We could send people quite easily, but now we're running into a problem that we simply can't get people out easily and we can't transfer goods easily. Will the next Labour government be looking at freedom of movement with Europe at all?
Well, let me first address the problem, then completely answer that. Obviously, we had freedom of movement when we were a member of the EU. We haven't got it anymore, and we're not going back. There is no case for saying we go back into the EU. We had that referendum back in 2016. We got an outcome for it. But I do want to address your question because I've been to Airbus many times before, not here, but obviously Broughton and other places like that. And I know they explained to me in the particular thing, and there'll be other examples here, of the team going to Toulouse to deal with the wings and going for, well, as long as is necessary to do the work, which will be the pattern, I suspect, here. That, to me, is not freedom of movement. That's not about people going to live in another country. It's about a workforce from here or somewhere in the UK going to do a particular job and then return. And we need to improve that. And that's why I do think that we can get a better deal with the EU than the one we've got. We've got a botched job because Boris Johnson simply wanted to say he'd got it over the line, didn't do the detail, and we've got a deal which doesn't work as well as it should do. So we've got to take that on, closer relationship. I think actually not just in trade, but also in defence. I think there's huge scope for closer work on defence and security. And also education, by the way, I think we could do a lot closer work on. But I've always strongly advocated that if you've got a team of engineers or whatever it may be, going to work in another country as part of the project of work they're doing and then coming back, of course we've got to make that as easy as possible. It just does not make any sense on any level to make that more difficult than it already is. Sorry, Rach, did you want to come in on that?
I'll just add a couple of other things. Beyond the challenges that you've spoken about here, Airbus, there's a number of other areas where we want to have improved trading relationships. So, for example, we would be looking to secure a veterinary agreement to speed up the flow of food and drink goods between us and the rest of Europe. And that would help other tradable goods as well because it would reduce some of the backlogs at the borders. We've got a great cultural industry in the UK, but at the moment for touring artists, the bureaucracy of being able to tour around Europe is prohibitive and bureaucratic and cumbersome. And so we would look to secure those touring rights for artists, as well as the mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Our service sector represents more than 80% of what we do in the UK, and yet there was almost nothing for services in that Brexit deal. So those are just some of the areas where we would want to forge closer relationships. But more widely, we would want to work more closely with our nearest neighbours and trading partners and see them as just that, partners, and build closer relationships, which I think is in all of our interests here and in Europe, and it's certainly in our national interest as a country.
Yeah, and research, really, really important. Right, I'm so sorry you've been waiting so long and I've looked towards the back of the room. So we'll come here and then I'll be looking more widely and behind us I should do as well. Sorry.
So my name's Sarah. I work for the propulsion test department. So we're the department that tests the propulsion system and fly around the world and fuel the satellites. So we fly to America, we fly to South America. We used to do Baikonur, but obviously Russia happened, so we don't do that one anymore. So my big one is obviously talking about particularly net zero and stuff like this. I think the problem that myself and a lot of people have, particularly as an engineer, is I kind of see that we are way putting the cart before the horse. It's all well and good talking about electric cars, but the fundamental infrastructure isn't capable of it. Our national grid can't take a fully electric house, it can't take fully electric cars, it's not going to work. The solar panels we have are insufficient, wind farms are not sufficient. No one seems to be looking at nuclear, even though it's probably the best pound for pound in terms of power. What is the strategy going forward? Because if you're going to try and force no more petrol cars, no more diesel cars, then you need to address the fact that the fundamental infrastructure is not there to allow this to happen. It just isn't going to work. And industry will fail because of it, because people will just not be able to get to work anymore if they can't drive a petrol car. It is as simple as that. We need to address the foundations first before we start looking at the other stuff. And we're not doing that. We're addressing all that stuff. We're not addressing the foundations. It isn't going to work.
Yeah, no, look, thank you for raising that, and I hope everybody heard the question there. Look, we have got to make the transition to renewables. We have to do that. We have a duty in relation to net zero. But more importantly, or equally importantly to that, renewables, whether that's hydrogen, nuclear is part of our plan, by the way, whether it's onshore or offshore wind, floating offshore wind is incredible engineering that is taking place. There's hydrogen. There is a race on in the world for the next generation of jobs in renewables. And that race, European countries are out in that race, the US is out in that race, and Rishi Sunak's in the changing room. But that means that if you think about the next generation that come after you and the generation after that, it's their jobs that we're talking about, the secure jobs of the future. I am convinced that we can do this here. I mean, if you take offshore floating wind, they're amazing pieces of kit, by the way, amazing bits of manufacturing and engineering and design. We're really good at that. We're really good at that. We ought to be doing it here in this country. I went up to, just outside Glasgow, there's a wind farm just on the hills up there. There's about 200 or 300 wind turbines. They're obviously static, ground-based. When I went there, it was incredible. They were going to create enough energy for the whole of Glasgow and the surrounding region. But two things struck me. One, we didn't have a battery big enough to hold the energy they were making, so they were stopped on some days from creating energy. That's a lack of planning. Secondly, I said to the CEO of Scottish Power, how many of these wind turbines then were made in the United Kingdom? The answer, none. And that's what we've got to change. Now, as for the charging points, the grid, that's got to be fixed. That's absolutely got to be fixed. The grid is a big problem because it's taking far too long. If you want to build a wind farm, it takes you 2 years to build a wind farm, 2 years. It'll take you 13 years at the moment under this government to get any power out of it, because 5 years is lost in planning, and then another 6 or 7 with the grid crawling towards the wind farm. We've got to take the tough decisions to cut through that. Planning rules have to change, the grid has to change, and at pace. But what we can't do, I really feel this strongly, is simply push the date back. Because with electric vehicles, if all you do is say, there's a problem with charging, therefore we wish to push the date back of electric vehicles, all you do is not fix the problem, because you need to have a target, a date when this is going to happen by. If you talk to the manufacturers of electric vehicles, they want a hard-edge date because they are making the transition, they're changing their production lines, and they want to know with certainty what date are we working to. Because the government shifted it by 5 years. That didn't help them, those making cars, because they had tried to work out what their market would be based on the date that they had been given. Government then says, too difficult, park it back 5 years, and suddenly all of their sums were thrown into disarray. That doesn't help them. So we've got to rise to the challenge. We've got to do this. I genuinely believe this is the biggest opportunity that we've got for the next generation of jobs, and we've got to take it, because these are high-skilled, valuable, secure jobs of the future. And of course, it gives us, you know, in the case of energy security, so Putin can't put his boot on our throat, and lower bills. Renewables are much, much cheaper than fossil fuels. So there's a massive prize to be had. But I don't underestimate the challenge you put to us, which is, for heaven's sake, you know, charging points are all over the show. Rachel knows this because she drives an electric car.
Yeah, just doesn't seem like there's a strategy.
Yeah.
Let me just say two practical things that we would do if we are fortunate enough to win the next election. First of all, we would create Great British Energy, which would be a wholly publicly owned energy company to invest in the production of new energy. So floating offshore wind, onshore wind as well, so that we, taxpayers, will have a stake in that and can get a return on that investment. And the second is a national wealth fund. We're one of the few big developed countries in the world that doesn't have a national wealth fund.
Goes to your point about investment.
We would endow that national wealth fund with money from extending the windfall tax on the big profits that energy companies are making today. And that national wealth fund would invest alongside business. We have committed to getting £3 of private investment for every pound of taxpayers' money that goes into that. And that would invest in gigafactories for electric vehicles, making our ports ready for renewable energy, in floating offshore wind, green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, because there are good jobs that we can bring to Britain. We have the industrial heritage, we have the skills, the geography with our shallow waters on the North Sea, make us a great place to do this investment, but other countries are getting ahead of us. So the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy are about making what Sarah says, those barriers to that investment, unlocking those and making sure that we can get the jobs, we can get the lower bills and the energy independence that we need as a nation.
Just one more example on that, because it's just in my mind. When I went up to Aberdeen to talk to the energy sector about the transition, they are planning to use the pipework that they have been using for bringing oil and gas in for carbon capture to put the carbon back into the places that the oil and gas was taken out of. So they are already years ahead of other countries because they've got that infrastructure and they've got the workforce with the skills to operate it. So I genuinely think we can get ahead. Let's take another question or comment. I'm just going behind me because I'm conscious we've had our backs to you the whole time. So my apologies. I'll go here and I'll try to take in. Do you want to come forward and we can spot everybody? But the gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Cristiano Contini and I've been in the company for 5 years now. I'm a spacecraft engineer and manager here in Airbus. My question is about the current situation with the junior doctors. I was wondering, what is your strategy about that?
Well, on the junior doctors, we need to, and the government should have resolved the dispute long ago. The government's been sitting it out for I don't know how long. We've had a situation where the government and the union have been arguing about who gets in the room first to solve this. We can't have any more of that, and we would get in the room and negotiate, but also do the necessary work to take the NHS forward. I'm conscious that I'm turning my back now on almost everybody else, so should we just, let's take one other at this. Yes, lady here. There is a mic flying around.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Abby and I'm a student working with Airbus doing my year in industry.
Oh, brilliant.
It's been amazing.
Yeah.
But I have a big passion for STEM and I also happen to be visually impaired. One of the biggest problems that I've faced, aside from access to my education, which has been really difficult, has been applying for jobs because I'm finding that people either don't believe I'm capable of the job or aren't giving me access to the assessments that are needed for the job. You've spoken before about trying to encourage more people with disabilities into jobs, but as I'm finding that the biggest problems that I've faced have been people not believing I can or people not giving me access to the required assignments. How do you propose to overcome this?
Well, thank you for raising that because I think it's a really important point. I do think that a government that understands that and is supportive is an important part of the equation. So it goes back to the earlier question about GPs, etc. A government that understands how do we make sure that we get the best talent out of everybody and make sure the talent that is there is fully used and is supportive of that makes a massive difference to how everybody else behaves and the attitudes that are there. So I do think there are things that we can do to bring out, if you like, the brilliant skills. And also, why on earth wouldn't we want to? I mean, look at you're here doing a year. That's a fantastic use of your talent. You may come back here, who knows, and be part of one of the great teams here. That is very good for Airbus. It's very good for our economy. It's very good for you, and it's very good for this community. So, you know, the benefits outweigh the out-of-date attitude that I think is somewhere there.
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic story. There is an access to work scheme that is supposed to help people with disabilities, but it goes back to the question earlier from Emma. And I think this point about there are loads of people who want to work, but for whatever reason, they're not given the support. And the support for access to work has been cut. And all that means is that people who have got talent and potential are not contributing in the workplace. And there's something like more than 20% of people aged 16 to 65 who are now not in the workforce. That's higher than it was before the pandemic. We need to get everybody who can work back into work and give them the support and the tools to do the job. And look, I mean, I'm sure you will do incredibly well. You're already doing really well. But there's lots and lots of people who need that support to make the most of their talents and potential too.
And there's something fundamental here that is really important, which is about dignity and respect. That should apply all of the time. But obviously it should also apply at work. And one of the plans we have is for a new deal for working people, which has dignity and respect of working people at its heart. Because every good employer knows that if you treat your workforce with dignity and respect, then actually that's better for them as individuals, but it's also better for the company and for the business. It's not rocket science, so it is the right thing to do, but it's also actually in the wider interest, the right thing. We should be making the most of all the talents that we've got in this country. And wherever we're holding that back, we're making a huge mistake for the country. There's a great deal of potential that I think is untapped. Where haven't we gone for a question or a contribution? Yeah, I can see a hand. I can't see a face, but if you could just find your way forward, or Prentice will come to you with a mic with a bit of luck.
I'm Riley. I'm a technician here. I've been here for 6 months. My question is, if you're introduced into Parliament, will you continue to support Ukraine and Israel in their conflicts with Middle East and Russia?
Well, let's take that they're two separate situations, so let's take them separately. On Ukraine, we have long supported, ever since the beginning of the awful conflict, Ukraine, against the aggression of Putin. And we have not allowed it to become a party political issue. So I actually went to Kyiv in Ukraine and saw President Zelensky to deliver a message to him, which was, should there be a change of government, there won't be any change in the support of the UK for Ukraine. I think it's really important to have sent that message to him and through him to the Ukrainian people. And for that reason, we have not picked a fight with this government on Ukraine. So whether we've had private differences of opinion about particular features or not, because I think the only winner, if there's division here on Ukraine, is Putin. And I'm not prepared to let that happen, which is why we took that stand. And that has meant that our Parliament has been able to speak with one voice on this, and I think that's very important because it's such a serious issue. So far as the Middle East is concerned, obviously that's an awful conflict with now, tens of thousands of people killed in Gaza, with scenes that you'll have all seen in the last day or two in relation to Rafah, which are just horrifying. Families in safe places, in safe zones, losing their lives, being killed in Rafah. So that's just got to stop. And this is our message. That ceasefire needs to be in place. It needs to be in place straight away. And it needs to provide the space for hostages to come out. There are hostages who've been held for a very, very long time. I can't even imagine the state that they will be in. I know the state their families are in, or some of them, because I've met their families. And it is horrendous. But also, aid needs to get in, desperately needed aid. You've seen the conditions on the ground in Gaza for Palestinians, absolutely catastrophic. So that aid needs to get in. The third reason we need a ceasefire is to provide the space for a political process to start to resolve this, because in the end this is only going to be resolved through a political process. That is going to require leadership from countries, including from ours, if we are privileged enough to come in to serve, to create that space, that dialogue as we go forward. It will require the recognition of Palestine as a viable state, as part of the process, alongside a safe and secure Israel, secure from the sort of attacks that they have endured and still actually going into Tel Aviv. But that is the only way forward as we see it. And I'll just end by saying we would see it as our solemn duty for the UK to play its full part in that if we're privileged enough to come in to serve, because I think too many political leaders in the last 10 years have looked away from this problem, even though they've known it's there, not wanting to pull their weight. I don't think we can go on like that anymore. Thank you so much. Where else should we go? Yes. Just a microphone so we can pick you up. And
so, Mark and Marie, I'm a thermal spacecraft engineer, and I just wanted to, because I believe the energy sector is very important at the moment. And so I think there is maybe a subject on the renewable energy, so we talked about the wind farm. I believe it's not maybe as simple as just because sometimes the wind doesn't stop, and sometimes it's a bit too high for the capacity of the system. Yeah. And also, so it's very good, and I think the price has decreased since a few years. But if we need to plan in the next 30, 100 years, maybe a bit less. But how can we predict that the price of those facility, we can't predict it basically, and it's directly linked with the oil, because nowadays we use the oil to build those wind farms, but basically the peak of oil we have passed it and it's now decreasing. So because it has decreased, the price of those facility will increase.
Okay.
So I just sorry, apologize, because I feel got another one on and that's my second question. I think the energy is driving a lot the economy, and I think in the UK we are extracting a lot of oil in the North Sea. So how are we going to manage between the extraction of this oil and the environmental problem?
Okay, you packed a lot into there.
Yeah,
I'll try and unpick it, and then I'll obviously bring Rachel into this. Look, on the question of wind power, yes, obviously that does depend on the wind, but there's a huge amount of energy that can be generated extremely cheaply. As we've seen, the price has gone down and down and down in relation to wind, but it shouldn't be on its own. It's got to be alongside solar, alongside hydrogen, alongside nuclear. And some of the nuclear, I think there's an opportunity to get ahead on nuclear as well with the next generation of nuclear, where again, we're the country that actually can lead on some of the technology here, and we should get ahead of it. So we need to go to that. On your broad point, because this is really important, that oil and gas has done us really well as a country for many, many years since we've been using the North Sea, but the oil and gas is running out. And therefore, there's going to have to be a transition. And you have to take a grown-up attitude to this. This happened with coal. We got to the end of meaningful life for coal, and the government didn't have a plan. And some communities across the country are still feeling the effects of that because the government didn't have a plan for the future. So it's no good Rishi Sunak putting his head in the sand and pretending none of this is happening, because you can't let down the next generation. Because, and go and talk to the workers in Aberdeen who are in the energy sector. They know that oil and gas is coming to an end. What they want to know is, what's the future for my job? What's the future for my children's job and their children's job? Because I want to see secure work for them. And that's why the transition to renewables is so important, and I think there are tens of thousands of jobs there for the future, and it will bring the price down, permanently, because oil and gas. I mean, our oil is sold onto the international market. We don't control the price of oil. The government's tried to play this game of pretending that the North Sea oil and gas is something where they can control the price. It can't. They sell it to the international market, and then we buy it back off the international market. So when the price goes through the roof, your bills go through the roof. With renewables, we can take control of that, which means that even in the event of an awful conflict like Ukraine, which we don't want to see, we've got control over what happens in this country. So on so many fronts, it's the right thing to do. Rachel, can I bring you in? And I think we may be slightly running out of time.
I would just add that there are new technologies like the battery storage, so that you can store the energy and then use it when it's needed, and also floating offshore wind. There is more wind further out at sea, and so these new technologies, which are incredibly exciting, means that you're more likely to have that generation of energy all through the day. But you do, as had the earlier question from Sarah, need that baseload capacity, which is why nuclear is also a really important part of the energy mix, both now and going into the future, because that nuclear at the moment is going to be coming off stream. We need to quickly make sure not just Hinkley but Sizewell, Anglesey and other projects are delivered, and small modular reactors may also have a really important role to play in that as well, to preserve that energy mix so we have that diversity of supply, but that we are more sufficient, self-sufficient here in the UK for our basic energy needs.
We've run out of time, I'm afraid. Can I, alongside saying a big thank you to you for being here and for putting your questions to us, if there was something you wanted to say or a question you wanted to ask and we haven't had time, if you care to and you get that through, we'll give you an email contact or something like that. We're very happy to try and deal with any queries that you have or any questions you have or any ideas that you have. I don't want you to feel this is a sort of one-off and only opportunity, because if we're a government of service, it is your right to ask us questions. It's your right to put your ideas forward. It's your right to question what we do and say, does that hold up to water in my own mind? So we haven't got time for anything more here, but if you did have something that you wanted to raise, or even as you go home you think, actually, you know what, I've got another question now, if you get it to our team, we will do our level best to make sure we can get answers to you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry? Thank you. Thank you.